Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. It's like 6 o'clock on Thursday night, so I guess these are turning out to be Thursday night Q&As. They're really supposed to be Fridays, but I don't know. Hopefully, nobody cares. I just try to do it where I could give the most attention to it. I don't ever want to feel like I'm just sticking these in when I have extra time. I want to make sure I give it the focus it deserves. I hope that sounds right. I hope that doesn't sound douchey or anything, but I mean it in a nice way. Anyway, looking forward to see what questions people have this week, and let's jump right in. All right, starting out this week, TonyMaura. I'm glad you're giving the Polymega guys a chance. Yeah, I mean, that's all they deserve, right? That's all of us deserve is just a chance, especially when I was so vocal about it being possibly bogus. So that's all I felt that they deserved, and what happens from there on, it's up to them. If it sucks, it's their fault. But I don't know, I'm trying to keep an open mind, but I don't think it's for me, but it probably is for a large group of people. So thanks for your input. Alexander Alvarado asked, what's the current de facto solution for PSP on an HD TV? He has the official component cables and has the same issue as everyone else where it's the small size of the game on the screen. So I actually have little to no experience with PSP. As time went on, I got more into regular consoles and retro and didn't really spend as much time with handhelds. I know My Life in Gaming did a video where they talked a lot about it, and I would guess that if it's a component video output, that you should at least try the open source scan converter to see how that would work. But to be honest, that's something where I think other people might have much better answers for you. So maybe if anybody could respond here in the chat, or I don't even know how the private messaging works on Patreon. It's often broken, but if anybody else could help, I would really appreciate it. Sorry, I don't have a better answer. It's just one of the few retro gaming things, if you can call a PSP retro. It's one of the few that I have almost no experience with. So sorry about that. Mark Pitos said the jump in video quality was immediately noticeable even before I mentioned it. Thank you. So what I plan on doing for the short term is back to my Sony a6300 with 35mm lens for all of the weekly stuff and for a lot of the me on camera stuff. And then I upgraded to the GH5 with a 25mm Leica lens, which is going to be for everything else. The second camera in the interviews and possibly maybe me shots too, depending. I just couldn't find a 35mm lens, and I prefer prime because you get for half the cost. You get a much better picture when you don't have to worry about zooming. So I like prime for what I do, but the bigger jump in quality will be when I switch over to a different capture card. So for at least the weeklies are probably going to just look like this for the foreseeable future, but for all of the stuff that's the special videos, that's going to be captured through a 4K capture card, so even the me shots will be as clear as can be. So thanks for your input. I'm very proud of the fact that I'm able to get good quality video for way less than most other people spend. I just saw, not to go too off topic, but I just saw a whole post about what the top 10 YouTubers are using and what they suggest you use. And some of these people are suggesting that people who make YouTube videos start out with $5-6 grand worth of equipment. That's nuts. You could do this for $400 nowadays, as long as you're willing to buy used equipment. So I try to just do it all on a budget so I can spend my money on other stuff, and hopefully it comes out good enough. And I should have at least one camera and lens up for sale soon for anybody looking to do quality stuff like this as well, for not thousands of dollars. So thanks for the input. Darkstar7 asked a few questions. With the Mr. Lag test, are the results consistent at all resolutions? I didn't try, and I only tried those 2 cores. That's a good question. The problem I have is, and this is a very selfish thing to say, I do realize that, but the problem I have is with some of these testing that I do, if I really wanted to do it right, I'd have to spend all day. And Mr. is a platform that's constantly evolving and constantly having new and awesome stuff on it. So for me to spend a full day working on it and having it completely and totally obsolete in a week, I don't have the time budget for that at the moment. So I don't know, but I do know that the team that's working on it is awesome, and all of them would be willing to share their input and help. So if you do any of the lag tests that I've done, which is very easy to reproduce. If you find any issues, just let them know and they'll work with you, and maybe there's a bug in one resolution. But at this point, I would feel confident playing through HDMI knowing that it's as low lag as one could ever expect. And if it does get better, I don't know if it's fast enough, or now it's fast enough where if it does get even faster, I don't know if it's even noticeable the way flat panels work. So I'll keep everybody updated on that. Sorry, I just fell over there. In my eye, how is the downscaling for both lag and quality? Some cores render at very high resolutions, and the output on the HDMI is actually downscaled. I didn't really know. Are you sure that's how it works for the Mister? I know in analog mode, when I'm doing RGB out, they render exactly it's exactly like the original console, down to the same exact quirks you see on an oscilloscope and on certain monitors follow even in the Mister cores, as in comparison to real hardware. So I'm not really sure about that. You say you use your HDMI at 640 by 480 or 800 by 600. So that that's an interesting situation, because you're right. Maybe the HDMI core might render, or the scaler might render in 1080p and then have to drop down. That's interesting, and that's something I hadn't considered. So when I'm doing HDMI, I almost always use 720p, just because, or I guess 480p sometimes, just because when I put it into some of the timelines that I'm working with, that seems to be the best. But I haven't done too much work with it yet, so that's something that's worth looking into, I guess. Alexi said he was planning on opening up 240p over HDMI. I can't remember if I tested that. That would be ideal if there could somehow be a 240p HDMI output where you didn't have to set phase or anything. You could just have a capture card do a one-to-one digital reproduction. That would be my preference, because much like that whole long video I did about video capture, everything that I've been doing lately, I capture in its original resolution and then manipulate that based on however I want to use it. So 4K for 4K videos, or sometimes 1080p, so you could do side-by-side on 4K videos. But I do absolutely, I do see the need and appreciate one-to-one digital output for stuff like this, especially when 4K scalers come about. You'd want to just keep it at the original and let this, whatever fancy new scaler that comes out, do all the work. So all good questions. I only don't really have too much to add to most of it. That was just my input for now. And lastly, have I heard any word on the analog DAC, or if we'll ever get 4:3 resolution options? No, nothing. In fact, I haven't even heard from Kevin in a long time, so I hope he's not pissed at me or anything. Doomlike had a couple of questions. Any recommendations for a good HDMI switch, or what to look for when buying one? Definitely reference Dave's topic on Shmups. He's been checking out a whole bunch of HDMI switches to see what works best. As always, I want one box that does everything. I want dual output that separates audio, and the one that I found pretty much works fine, but you often have to power cycle it if you change resolutions on the OSSC, which isn't a big deal, just remote power on, power off, but it won't pass audio through the HDMI ports. Unless I got two bad ones in a row. I bought two of these things, but I know that's kind of a weird thing, and it doesn't really bother me, because for the dual outputs, one of them I need analog, and the other one I just use optical to my stereo. So that doesn't bother me yet, but it will at some point. So Dave went the other route, and Dave got switches that are only one output, but that work, that are more solid with the OSSC. And then from there, switchers, or splitters, audio breakout boxes, and stuff like that. So, I'm very limited in space and plugs and all that, so I just wanted to have as much in one as possible. But definitely check out that thread. That might have much better answers to your questions. Also, do I know of any plans for a quality 2.4 gig controller receiver combo for the SNES? 8-Bit Doe mentioned that they might make it, Crix mentioned, but I don't know of anything actually in production ready to go. At the moment, you're just stuck with the Bluetooth solutions for the SNES. Thanks for following up on the PC Engine 8-pin mini-DIN. He bit the bullet and ordered another one of the Sega Sonic Fan Unigen converters. So that's cool. At least you'll be able to use both your wireless controllers with it. So hope that sums it all up. Marcus Eli Hostrup was posting in regards to if there's any service centers for CRTs, and he said it's possible one of the service centers, Sony links on the pro.sony, still repairs Trinitron. Yep, that's a great thought. You might want to check into those, but just a few things to remember is that they were used to dealing with production houses, so prices would probably be high. And depending on the price, they kind of should be high. It's a lot of work to do some of these things. But the experience I've had was that places that have been around and used to work on CRTs just refuse to anymore. The last one that I went to, they worked on an XM29 of mine. They only charged like $140 or something. It wasn't bad, but they found the problem with the power supply and fixed it, and it happened again. So I brought it back, and 4 months went by, and I finally called for a status update, and they said, look, we can't find any parts, just come get this thing. And then they made me carry it up the stairs and out to my car. So they made it very clear that they didn't want to mess with CRTs ever again. And I have a feeling a lot of places might be like that. So just keep that in mind, but definitely worth a try. John Viley asked a question that I was just talking about like 5 minutes before I started this. Do I happen to know of anyone out there selling Virtual Boy controller extensions or have experience building your own? So this is the thing we're running into now because I'm about to run that Virtual Boy event. And I had a friend of mine, Ben from iFix Retro, who's pretty good at controllers. By pretty good, I mean good. Make me a custom one with it was a broken Virtual Boy controller. I didn't ruin a working one. And he took that PCB, stuck it inside of a bigger arcade stick, one of the normal sized ones these days. Then we run the wire out, and he had a little power jack in there. Works perfect, but the wire is like taut to the Virtual Boy. So we were talking about different ways of doing that and different ways of doing it without ruining original controllers. So I'll give you the full rundown. To answer your question first, if you just search the Retro RGB site, you'll see a post about Kevin Mellett making 3D printed connectors for the Virtual Boy. You should be able to 3D print those connectors, buy the parts, and make your own extension cables that way, which we may end up doing. For controllers, for people that want to build them into arcade sticks like we've been doing, what we were thinking of is having some kind of standard DIN, something where you could buy a connector as well as the cable itself. So like maybe even an 8-pin mini DIN, the same as we use for video, because you have tons of different options to mount that as a port on the controller, and then buy like a 12-foot 8-pin mini DIN cable, cut it in half, and in the middle, use those 3D printed connectors. So that way you're really only making half a cable, you're not making the whole thing, and it should make wiring on the control stick a lot better. And as far as how to get that in there, I talked to Benj Edwards, the creator of his Virtual Boy sticks, and he said eventually he's going to look into trying to sell those boards separately. So I think he's still going to sell off a couple of his sticks before he'll even consider that. But Benj didn't use guts of a Virtual Boy controller. He built his own PCB. So I'm sure he'd be willing to sell those, when I say sooner rather than later. Not, my guess would be those sticks he builds are expensive, so it'll probably take a month or two to sell. Then maybe he'll put those on the market. So from that point, anybody looking to turn an arcade stick into a Virtual Boy controller would be much easier. Buy his board, wire it to 8-pin mini DIN, put that jack in the back, and then finish the rest of it. So that was a lot more than you'd asked for. Sorry for the long-winded, but we were just having this conversation about what to do about the Street Fighter event. And because now my arcade stick that I love has a Virtual Boy cable constantly dangling out the back, which is annoying. So hopefully all of those would apply to what you were looking to do. And just search the Retro RGB site for like Kevin Mellett or Virtual Boy, and you'll see the 3D printed connectors. Everett had a few questions about deinterlacing and the forthcoming PS2 HDMI mod, which is still a ways away, so please don't pester Christoph and Dan about that quite yet. I know a lot of people are waiting on that one. So, as far as I know and as far as I understand, the ways that you're talking about, the DC HDMI and GC Video use Bob deinterlacing. and you do get a flickery look about it, but it's essentially zero added lag. Whereas if you just output 480i to your TV, very often it'll look really good, but you'll add, I mean, I think the measurements I was taking was something like 10 times the lag of on some TVs. At the very least, on the good ones, it was still something like I'm just going to use numbers over a CRT. It was something like 4 milliseconds longer than a CRT for just regular progressive scan resolutions, which is awesome. That's pretty much zero lag in most cases. And then it was something like 36 to 50 milliseconds of lag with 480i or even 1080i. So that was pretty interesting to see how much more work it takes. So I believe and Christoph himself even responded, but the theory behind all that is those devices don't have a frame buffer, and the way that they're doing it, you're not able to do any other kinds of deinterlacing. So I think the way he's going about doing the PS2 HDMI is doing it in a way where it might add a few milliseconds of lag or a frame, but it will be able to do much better deinterlacing. So Christoph himself responded, the PS2 HDMI has external RAM on board for more advanced deinterlacing. Basic bob deinterlacing and weave deinterlacing is already working. He's already experimenting with motion adaptive deinterlacing, although that would introduce lag. All deinterlacing methods would be able to switch through the OSD. That's freaking awesome. So, that whenever you're working with 480i, these are the same issues you're going to run into, which is why I felt the need to do a longer description and a longer answer to your question, because anytime you're talking 480i into a flat screen or into a processor, these are the things that you're going to have to run into. So I'm thrilled for PS2 HDMI, and I'm also looking forward to testing some of the PS2 emulators out there, because I'm assuming you would need an incredibly fast PC, but I was just watching the Virtua Racing comparison that John Linneman, Digital Foundry, posted, and he was showing PS2 Virtua Racing through the latest version of the PS2 emulator running in, I think, 1080p. It looked insane. It looked really good. I think it was rendering in that or something. So obviously emulation and real hardware are two completely different things, and of course I get really mad when people post on a video that's talking specifically about real hardware and talk about emulation, but it was worth mentioning in this, and that for some of those solutions, maybe if you're like a hardcore PC gamer, that would be an option to look into. Me personally, I love playing with emulation, like messing around with and experimenting, but if I'm going to sit down and play a PS2 game, it's going to be on real hardware, and if I want to do it on a flat screen, it's going to be with a PS2 HDMI, whenever that does come out. So, good question, and thanks, Christoph, for jumping in. Robert Dickinson had a question that affects a lot of people, and unfortunately there is an answer, but you might not like it. He said that with his Dreamcast, he was able to buy a Toro, and he got a picture with a VGA out to his OSSC, but when using an RGB Scart cable to the OSSC, he gets no sync. So that one's easy. You just need to go in and press the button that changes the sync combiner on the inside. So that's the good news. You should be able to use Scart that way. Here's the bad news. Almost every solution out there for the Dreamcast, the Toro, the Kenzie, some of the other solutions, the names I'm not remembering, the retro gaming cables, all-in-one cable, at least the prototype that I have, all of the major solutions out there combine sync in a way that BVMs don't like it. So the easy answer to that, which is very cheap, so it's annoying but cheap, is if you've already bought a Toro, run Scart. You could run Scart to your OSSC, I'm assuming through like a G-Scart switch or something, and run VGA into an Extron RGB interface. You can get like the 192Vs for $10, $15, $20 on eBay if they haven't gone up too much in price. And then you run that to your BVM, and that does a different kind of sync combining to RGBS from HV, and that would solve the problem. But now, just within a day or two, Dan, Citrus 3000 PSI, had worked with Retro Access to build a Scart cable for Dreamcast that the purpose of building this was to solve that issue, really, to get the best sync combining that you can for all of the retro gaming use. There's nothing wrong with the other solutions, it's just that this newer one covers everything. So I kind of changed my opinion, and I have updated the Dreamcast page on this just yesterday. My opinion on all this stuff now for analog output on a Dreamcast. If you have a Scart solution that involves an RGB monitor, the new retro access cable is the one to buy. If you have a Scart solution that that has like the OSSC and something else, like a scaler, or a different scaler, or whatever, or just going into the OSSC, you don't need two outputs, then any of those solutions should be fine. And in fact, I think the retro gaming cables one's going to be a little bit cheaper, so maybe save a few dollars if you don't use any RGB monitors. You're just Dreamcast into a switch into the OSSC. Both of the cable solutions are switchable, so you do get both 480i and 480p. And then things like the Toro, which I still love. The Toro is really something designed to cover for people that don't want to buy two cables. So if you have, for example, a very common scenario is people that have 240p and 480i only PVMs. My 20M2U and 14M2U don't support 480p, but I love them. I'll never get rid of those. So for that scenario, you would use the Scart output. And then picking up a cheap but really good quality VGA monitor, luckily, is still common. Hopefully, people won't catch on for a little while longer so us retro gamers could pick them up before they go back up in price. But at the moment, you could still get a really great VGA monitor for cheap. So stuff like the Toro is use the VGA out for that, use the Scart output for your RGB monitor, and your total solution is still way cheaper than buying one multi-format BVM and two cables or something. So by no means is your Toro now out of date. You could still use it. Just if you want to use it with your BVM, get any Extron RGB interface, which, to be honest, if you own a BVM, this is something that I strongly feel people should have, even if they never use it. That one time that you need to hook up like a 480p VGA signal, that's how you would do it, with one of those Extron RGB interface that combines the sync for you. So if you could find one of those cheap, I mean, that's a good tool to have no matter what. And if you just want one Scart solution for everything, you have all of your Scart stuff into a G-Scart, one output going to the OSSC, one to your BVM, pick up the cable from Retro Access. And if you just go on to Retro RGB and search the site for it, it's one of the latest posts, probably May 1st, I think it was out. So it should be pretty easy to find. So sorry that the answer to your problem is buying more equipment, but it's just every single Dreamcast and BVM or 480p PVM owner would have this issue too. Conrad Klaus posted a question about the Noctua Fan for Dreamcasts, and while he already solved the issue himself, I just thought it was worth mentioning. In order to get the full kits, so you get the cable adapter and the 3D printed thing, laserbear.net is Greg Collins' website. That's probably the best place to buy it because you're buying directly from the person who has it. Or if you own a 3D printer, you could find those designs online for free. But the kits that Greg sells, I believe he could include them with the adapter, so it's plug and play. But if not, you could just, I hate cutting, but you could maybe cut the old fan's wire and then cut the new fan's wire and splice those together so you have the connector. I wouldn't recommend cutting anything on the Dreamcast, but that's certainly an option for anybody that wants to do that. So just getting the Noctua Fan or just 3D printing isn't the total solution. You do either need the cable adapter or do some cutting. But it's as far as mods go, that one's as easy as you could ask for. Just do it right. Use some heat shrink tubing so you don't have just wires flopping around inside your Dreamcast. Kairo 43 described a scenario that many people run into at first. They have a 20L5 and bought a couple of female Scart to male BNC adapters from retrogamingcables.uk. Using that to go Scart into the PVM works fine, And then the thought was going from the PVMs out to the OSSCs in. And for the record, you could do that with the monitor off as well. So if you could use that as a solution where it's essentially a dual output thing for you, because you don't have to worry. If you're just using your flat screen, don't turn on the monitor, and if you're just using the monitor, don't turn on your OSSC. The problem is, buying those adapters, as you suspected, they were wired for Scart Input. So yeah, you would have to open it up and move the cable over to match the right pin. That another thing that you could do, depending on what consoles you're using, is you could just get a BNC to VGA cable. The only downside of that is the way the OSSC works. The VGA input doesn't have a low-pass filter on it, which, I mean, depending on your consoles, there's a great chance that you would notice issues with that. You'd have some kind of weird interference on the screen, so it's definitely worth using that. But yeah, I would try moving the cable over and just use a multimeter. It's simple stuff. Make sure that the sync pin on one cable matches the sync pin on the female cable, and that should be fine. And if not, you could always just order another cable that's male Scart with a switch on it. And I like those too, because those come in handy for other stuff. So it's BNC on one side and a Scart male head on the other side with a switch that goes between input and output. So whatever you feel the most comfortable doing. If you don't mind soldering and checking with a multimeter, it's super simple. If you'd rather not be bothered, which I totally understand, just get the male one with a switch in it, and that should solve your problem. But great setup, and it's certainly what I recommend a lot of people start with, because you don't necessarily need a lot of the expensive equipment at first. I know a lot of people that do that and just plug one console in at a time, and it makes it way more cheaper to start out using all this awesome stuff. It's a Serial Wow had a great question. They own an OSSC and a RetroTinker 2X and are wondering if there's any reason to keep the old Framemeister. So the biggest advantage of the Framemeister, by far, is if you load up Firebrand X's profiles and you just set it to match whatever the input console is, it will work on anything. I don't think I've even heard of a capture card that it's not compatible with. So if you do a lot of streaming or game capture for whatever reason, it might be a really great tool to have, just because you never have to worry about it. Whereas things like the OSSC and even into the data path cards, you might run into issues. People have talked about things like NES or SNES, requiring the dejitter mod even directly into a data path, through the OSSC directly into a data path. It'll drop sync here and there, things like that. So that's the one use case. Anytime that you need a solution that will output to anything, that you could just load up a Firebrand X profile and be done, that's why I would keep the Framemeister. From just a gamer's point of view, if you're just playing your consoles on a flat screen and the OSSC works with your TV, then there would be no reason to keep the Framemeister at all. So that's pretty much it. That's really the only use case. If you need, if you don't want to mess around, you don't want to ever have the worry of, will the OSSC be compatible? I got 500 people showing up for a stream I'm doing, stuff like that. Then yeah, the Framemeister, keep that as a tool in your arsenal. If not, sell it and let me know. I know a few streamers that might want it for that reason. In fact, I know a few streamers that picked up RetroTinker 2Xs for that exact reason, because they love the OSSC. They would rather have a device that they know would always work no matter what, even if it was lower resolution. So yeah, great question. Alexander Alvarado had another question about the Acura Dreamcast HDMI adapter. He says there's a pixel shift that causes it to display offset from the left. Do I know any tricks to get it to behave? No, none. If you use a scaler, if you're going the Acura into a scaler, you might be able to do stuff that way. And certainly if you're going into a capture device, that's fine. But you'd be able to just manipulate it that way. But no, as far as just, Acura into your TV, you kind of just live with it. But, it was really just designed to be, even the Gecko, a cheap Dreamcast to HDMI solution that doesn't suck. And it definitely doesn't, especially if you use those pound cables or whatever other brand was selling those. So yeah, sorry, there's no way to fix it, but at least it still works and it doesn't add a ton of lag and all that. Kairo 43 had another question about a 20L5. I guess it has a double width expansion slot in the back, but only takes one card. They'd like to find a metal screw-in cover for the second half of the slot. Both for OCD, just to make sure that everything's covered, and for dust and stuff like that. So I don't really know what that's called either. I would just call it a dust cover or something like that. I would check on a forum or something. I hate to recommend forums because most of them are so toxic, but I would just ask if anybody has one for sale. And if anybody here with a 20L5, maybe somebody here owns one and then pulled that out because they used the expansion slots and now have spares, maybe they'd be willing to do that. But if not, I mean, as ghetto as this is going to sound, some blue painter's tape would completely take care of that for you. It won't leave a residue. It'll cover it nice so that you won't have to worry about dust getting in. It'll solve the problem. It's not what you wanted, but it'll work. Other than that, I mean, if you're good at 3D modeling, you could probably make one a 3D printed insert and just get some screws. But if you're not into 3D modeling, that's a ton of work. So sorry, I have no better answers for you. Jason Lee is having an interesting SNES problem. It's an original style. It's not a one chip. And it emits some video noise that he could only really see with Super Mario RPG. So he replaced all the caps, the power regulator, and did the vertical line fix, which cleared up the vertical line, but only seemed to slightly reduce the noise on Super Mario RPG. Any suggestions? And he has the HD Retrovision cables and an official power supply, and also tested the Insurrection Scart cable. So my first question would be, is it an original Mario RPG cart? Is it a repro, or are you playing through something like a ROM cart? Because whatever that might be, I would try that next first. Even if it's an original cart, if that same one looks fine on the other two, that would be, I mean, you already did all the things I would have checked. The first thing I would have said is the voltage regulator. The other thing you could try is a power supply. Maybe your other SNESs are one chips, and maybe the three chips draw more power. I don't know. That's just a random guess, by the way. And maybe your power supply is on its way out. So you could try one of the Power Plus ones. It requires 2 pigtail adapters. You could try one of the Triad ones that Firebrand X likes, which I think is 1 pigtail adapter. Other than that, I mean, it sounds like you've done everything that you can. So check that it's not Super Mario RPG itself, and then try a different power supply. And after that, I mean, now you're really getting into components that maybe the RAM is on its way out and it's only being accessed out of all the games you play in Super Mario RPG. I don't know, that'll be a tough one to diagnose, but keep us updated because that's kind of interesting, and I'd be willing to, or I'd really be interested to see what actually fixes it if you do get it fixed. Cole Voggs also asked about the Dreamcast cable. I think I just ran through everything that you would need to know. So yeah, just grab the Retro Access one now. It's out, it's available. You got to order them all in the morning because they sell out. I think Retro Access is still doing the thing where they keep their store open until enough sales come in where they know they could only make that amount in a day, and then they shut their store down and make all the cables and do it all again the next day. It's, in their defense, they're aiming to be the highest quality cable manufacturer on the planet. The 0.01% difference that most people don't care about, they're going for. So, kudos to them for that, but that's kind of the downside. Whereas Retro Gaming Cables is aiming to make a cable that's awesome, 0 complaints, but they could pump out a lot more of them. So, I have no favorite, I have no preference. I own all the cables. So, yeah, Retro Access is fine. If you could get there, if you could wake up by around 10 a.m. Eastern time is usually when I try to pick them up. So I would just pick one up and grab it. Hopefully, if you heard the description before, if not, rewind or something. But I already went through all of the different Dreamcast use cases and which cable might be right for each use. Pablo Romero had a good question that I have no answer to. What's my take on flat screen motion blur? Honestly, my take on it is for cheap TVs like the LG and the TCL that I reviewed recently, I don't even think about it because I keep my expectations so low with cheap TVs, and I've been very pleasantly surprised lately. You know, low lag solutions that work, that don't give me any trouble. So if it annoys me, I just put it out of my head and go, you know, I have an OLED in the other room. Don't even think of this. And if there is motion blur on my OLED, I don't notice it. I think I've spent so much time staring at a CRT, both through the lens of a camera, while doing all these videos, all my research, that CRTs always look one way to me, and flat screens always look another. So I think I might be the wrong person to ask about that because my brain is just used to seeing flat screens the way they are, and I only game really on my OLED. I use the LG I have for testing and stuff, and as a bedroom TV. So yeah, I got nothing. I'm really sorry. I just know that I don't hate my OLED at all for retro gaming, although I still prefer RGB monitors for that. And for the cheap stuff, I'm just happy it works at all these days compared to but even 4 or 5 years ago, trying to get a large flat TV that didn't stink for gaming. So I'm pleased with what I got, and I just try not to think about it. Sorry, terrible answer, I know. RetroTinker was talking about a high-pitch hissing noise from two types of Genesis Model 1s. So before I continue with the question, is it something that only happens when you turn the console on or off, or is it just always coming out of the console? So to continue on, it happens through headphones and every type of speaker he hooks up to it. He has two different Genesis consoles, a VA6 and a VA7. So that's important too, because VA6 and VA7, that's essentially the difference between a Model 1 and a Model 2. VA7s are pretty much Model 2 style ASIC motherboards in a Model 1 case. He's got new caps, so right there, that's one of the things I was thinking of as bad capacitors. And a CCAM by Tito? I don't know what a CCAM is. I'm really sorry. I don't know if that's a misspelling or if I just don't know what that is. It happens on both Genesis consoles. He's tried multiple power supplies and even bought the Power Plus adapter. He's running out of ideas of what could be the cause. So that's pretty interesting. First, what's a CCAM and is it installed in both? Because that, I mean, if it's an audio related thing, that might be it. And the other thing is, are you just getting audio through the front headphone connector, or did you install something else? So I would need more questions to diagnose that. I would also really like to know what installing a triple bypass into one of these would sound like. I would recommend it on the VA7 because that one, like all Model 2s, would greatly benefit from it. I think Model 1s will as well for all the reasons I'm about to explain, but you don't need an audio upgrade in a Model 1. However, when you do stuff like, when you do a triple bypass, especially on a Model 1, you're doing a couple of things. You're removing the RF and you're putting a Genesis 2 DIN in its place. If you do it right, it's super secure and it's awesome. It makes cabling so much easier, especially if you have a 32X. And then, you know, the board sits right there on top of it, and you get to do the video bypass, which is on a VA7, you don't have to worry about adding any extra components. And now, once you've removed the audio components from the motherboard, and you're just linking them to the triple bypass, that accomplishes a lot. So, one of the many reasons I want that, I recommend that on all Genesis 2 and 3s and VA7 Genesis 1s, is because I've found things like you don't have any of the ground hum that's just noise that you're picking up on the motherboard when you do that, at least in the revisions I tried, which is quite a lot. And if you do have ground noise, it's a lot less, it's a lot lower. And anything else that's been going on with the motherboard, including just bad designs and stuff, that might fix it. Imagine an antenna broadcasting stuff out into the world, and then you have other components near that picking it up. By removing it off the motherboard, hopefully that was a good enough way to explain it. So my suggestion is do a triple bypass on a VA7, see if that works. You could also try replacing the voltage regulator on the VA7. That's fairly cheap and easy to do. And kind of just go from there. If you don't do this stuff yourself, if you need triple bypass installers, just message me privately and I'll see if I could hook you up with whoever's closest to you. But both of those things are definitely what I would like to hear about. Maybe try the 7805 voltage regulators. I can't remember if I've ever seen those go bad in Genesis consoles, but I've been replacing them anyway because between now and never it will die, so why not stay ahead of the curve and look into a triple bypass and go from there. If it fixes it on the VA7, maybe try it on the VA6 too and see. But you'll certainly get a video quality and an audio quality boost on the VA7 with a triple bypass. So go for it, and I don't know. Let me know. Fill in the blanks if I didn't guess this right, and let me know if I could be of any other help, because that's a weird one. If it's a high pitch hissing the entire time the console's on, that's a bit of a weird one. If it's power on or power off, I think a lot of Genesis consoles just do that. Well, that's it for this week. Hopefully this went pretty smooth. I've been feeling weird all week. Somebody described to me that this is what allergies feel like. I've never had those before. Getting old sucks, I guess. So hopefully this went smoothly. As always, thank you for everybody who participates. And for anybody who's new to this, any questions at all that you have, just post in the newest video of whatever subscriber service you're signed up to. Bitbacker, Subscribestar, Patreon, YouTube's join service. I don't really care. It's whatever's easiest for you, but whatever service you have, just post on the newest video there. These videos are meant to be kind of my giving back to all the supporters. So while I do make them live on YouTube about a month after they air to all of you, I turn the comments off and I really just make this about all of the supporters. So anywhere you found this, just pick the latest one. The way things work, I can't really go back through the other ones. So if you found a video from a few weeks ago that you had a question on, please just post it on the newest video. And then that's it. I go from there. I usually have been saying every Friday I do them, but it's been the past couple Thursdays. So hopefully Thursday or Friday works for everybody. And if for whatever reason I don't get to your question, please re-ask it, because most of the time when that's happened, it's either been because the question came in after I shot the video, or if I just accidentally deleted the segment. It happens. But anyway, thank you so much for all your support. It's greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next week.